I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. In this episode, I interview Kevin and Melissa Miller, who lead the Boston Church of Christ. They've been leading this fabled church for a little over a year. And in this episode, they talk about how they became Christians, how they've built a culture of spiritual ambition, how they maintain high standards for both relationships and performance on their staff, what it was like learning from and losing Melissa's father, Wyndham Shaw. How did they develop so many high-volume preachers in Boston? Kevin shares 3 steps to reigniting your campus ministry. And finally, how they've managed to attract powerful talent to their church staff. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Kevin and Melissa, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here. Thank you for asking us to be here.
Yes, thank you.
How'd you guys become Christians?
I feel like I am a 4th, 5th, or 6th generation Kingdom kid. I don't even know how far back my great-great-grandparents, I think, were from Mainline Church of Christ. And so my mom became a Christian when she was 13, and my parents met in campus ministry in Florida. And we moved to Boston when I was almost 10. And I think watching their lives coming from such a legacy of faith that led me early on to feel like, how could I not want to do this? So I became a Christian shortly before I turned 13 as a young teen, and have not looked back since.
Yes, the generation for her, the legacy continues for her grandparent. My oldest daughter is about to baptize a friend, I think, in her dorm.
Wow.
My son just led his first Bible talk this week in high school. He was the only Christian there, and my youngest is probably this month or next month going to be making the decision for Jesus to be Lord. So it's amazing. I feel very blessed. You know, for me, I became a Christian when I was 20 years old in 1995, and I come from an Irish Italian, sort of loud, drinking, wild sort of family. And at about 19 years old, 20 years old, started really feeling unhappy with my life and where things were. And you know, there wasn't much of I don't think there was ever an Easter, Christmas, wedding, funeral that I went to that wasn't filled with drunkenness and wildness. And I have, you know, my mother has 9 brothers and sisters. She's in the McLaughlins, so I'm Irish and Italian. And, you know, there's coaches and business leaders, and everybody talks, you know, about an inch away from each other's faces. And the first time Melissa came to dinner with us, she said, why is your family yelling at each other the whole time? And I said, who's yelling? But it's just a loud. But at about 19, I started to really wonder what was going on in life, and I wasn't happy. And my brother, who's 3 years older than me, was the same. And we were kind of seeking God, seeking truth, seeking answers together. And you know, one day he came through he got reached out to by this incredibly introverted disciple in the Springfield area, Western Massachusetts. And this guy shared his faith with him. And 3 months later, my brother came walking through the door and said, you know, I'm getting baptized. I went to the baptism. And it was like nothing I had ever seen in terms of, you know, old and young, rich and poor, white and black, and everything in between. You could tell in this basement on a Tuesday night. And, you know, I started studying about a week later. And, you know, I think I started studying the Bible on a Tuesday night, and the following Tuesday night I was baptized. And, you know, since then, my mother and father have been baptized. My sister was baptized. I mean, the amount of children my brother's children, my children, friends that have been baptized.
Many of the McLaughlin aunties.
Yeah, a number of my aunts have become Christians, and it's amazing what this one decision from this quiet, introverted disciple in the Springfield area, the amount of lives that have been impacted by this one guy, it truly blows my mind.
So that person reached out to your brother.
Yeah, his name was Eric Kleinschmidt. Eric Kleinschmidt reached out to my brother, and then the guy that studied the Bible with us was named John Fenstermacher. So John Fenstermacher and Eric Kleinschmidt. I thought that I was joining a German church, but wasn't. It didn't turn out to be that way.
Okay, so you were 20 when you got baptized in 95. So you're what, 46?
Good, you're good.
Okay, great. All right.
Yeah, 46.
Now, how did you guys get together?
We met in the City of Love in Paris, and it was actually a great meeting. Mike Lamb and Bethany Jones, who I had grown up in the teen ministry with, actually set us up on a date. And I was actually about to start dating another guy who, before we had left to go to this campus leadership conference in Paris, was telling me about this friendship with a guy named Kevin, who he was looking forward to me meeting. And I was like, oh, great, whatever. And in the meantime, these other two disciples, Mike and Bethany, had simultaneously told both of us about each other and that we should meet. And so we met and had a conversation that led into a first date. And I think I was smitten pretty much right away. He had to be convinced, but it didn't take long.
No, the Mike and Bethany said, there's this girl and her daughter is Wyndham Shaw. So nobody,
Daughter.
What did I say?
Daughter.
Yeah, the daughter,
The daughter.
Wyndham Shaw's daughter. So that's and he's an elder. He was an elder. He's passed away, but he was definitely a major pillar in the Boston church. And I knew exactly who he was. I had only been a Christian for a year or two. And someone said, she never gets to go on dates because everybody's intimidated. And I thought, not me. And so I actually asked this friend who sort of liked her. This was back in the day when there was a period in the church where you didn't start dating. You started dating every other week. That was like the thing that was, and he was kind of in that mode with her. But I asked him, hey, do you mind? And he said no. And we went to the Louvre for our first date, saw the Mona Lisa, and
got me a stick of gum for dinner.
That's right. And then that kind of ended, and that date came to an end. She went off on a youth corps. I went back to Massachusetts, and I kind of was like, I don't think I'm going to pursue this because I don't want to mess this guy up. I mean, we're kind of friends, and I was kind of wrestling through it. And I remember I was talking. I had two roommates, and I asked him, what do I do with this situation? I don't know that I like her yet, but it was definitely a great date. And one of them, Chris Zillman, was one of the guys who was my roommate. He leads the church in Denver. And he said, no, I wouldn't do it. Don't ask her on another date. And then my other roommate said, oh, I would definitely do it. Trust God. He's in control. And as we were having that conversation, my brother's girlfriend, who is Christy Lamb, Christy Lamb is Roger's daughter and Michael's sister, who was dating my brother at the time. And she has since gone on to be with Jesus.
The Lamb siblings, we were very grateful for them.
We are. And she called as we were having this conversation because Melissa's mother had sort of called her to talk about some hope thing and dropped, Melissa's not actually interested in this other guy. And so I took that as a sign from Almighty God, called her the next day. And I probably 2 dates in, I knew I wanted to marry this girl.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, you guys couldn't come from really two more different backgrounds. I'm assuming, a Catholic background.
Yeah.
And right. Then your mainline church, ICOC. I mean, there's quite a difference. What is it about you that attracts you to each other?
I mean, I think we are entirely opposite and equally stubborn. So I think, I was very attracted to his charisma, his faith, his leadership. But I think we both had very similar dreams and passions. And, I don't think anyone could have married Kevin and been able to handle all of his wonderfulness. But I think we complement each other in many ways. I think I bring a lot of the family, he brings a lot of the army, and we've learned to meld that together with each other in great ways.
Yeah, it's funny to think about what attracted me, when we first met, and she was obviously beautiful, and
he was quite the romantic, still is.
Yeah, well, it's that Italian blood, we've got a lot of problems, but we do have romance in our blood. But I totally remember Melissa was so encouraging. She built me up so much, and it's funny, through the years, I was always pretty courageous and kind of a life in the room, but very insecure, and as a young man. And she was such and kind of a guilt-ridden person too. I mean, coming from my background and all the sin and all the the idea of God's grace and a relationship with God that's kind of over 27 years becomes so clear and connected. In those early years, and she was such this bright light of grace and forgiveness and joy, and she would build me up. And I remember just feeling like, wow, I love being around this person. She's so encouraging. And then I also remember she's the sweetest little cute thing, but man, she was getting fired from her dorm for sharing her faith as a RA. I mean, she was a radical kingdom first person. And when I saw that, I thought, there were no other causes that she really was sort of into, it was, and as a young man, I was like, I didn't know a lot of people quite like that. And it really stood out to me. And I pursued her.
Okay. That's a good lead in. One thing that interests me for you, Melissa, is you come from this long religious lineage, and yet you've got a lot of spiritual ambition. You wanted to go in the ministry. Where does that come from? I mean, the image of a person who's grown up in church is one who just takes it for granted. Not necessarily a positive image. Someone who's, just kind of comes but checks in, doesn't necessarily have a lot of spiritual ambition. Where did you get that? I mean, you could have just coasted on the legacy of your parents. Where'd you get your own spiritual ambition?
It's a great question, and it's easy for me to answer. And it, though you say it didn't, it doesn't come from my parents, but I think growing up watching them, they were the two most authentic and transparent Christians that I knew. And they lived out their faith in such an amazing way. My dad's favorite scripture has always been 1 Timothy 1:5, just about having a clear conscience, a sincere faith, and a pure heart. And that is how they both lived. And I saw the way that they loved people and the impact that they had on people, even as I saw things happen inside the church and how they handled conflicts and hurts. And I just saw through and through their genuine faith. And I think it made such an impact on how could I want to do anything else? I mean, certainly as a kid, and, we moved around a lot and they led in different churches, but people laugh when I tell them, I played dolls and with my dolls, and we'd had staff meetings and baptisms and holy marriages. And it just was certainly in me, but I think I had such a relationship with my parents too, where they were transparent with me. I saw their flaws, I saw their imperfections, but their quickness to want to grow, change, their humility. And it just really brought the Bible to life to me, that the fruit of it, the Bible was true, that when you lived it out, the fruit of it proved itself. And so I think it was just it made it very genuine to me.
Wow.
It was great.
That's awesome. What led you guys into the ministry?
I went into, I graduated before she did. And so I went into the ministry first. She was going to University of Connecticut, and I was going to UMass Amherst. So that was like an hour away from each other. So, for me, before I was a Christian, I was kind of a clown, drunk, keg party guy for a while, but about a year and a half before I became a Christian, I really started to search. Wasn't really happy with where I was, and I started to kind of figure out. I would go to civil rights rallies, and Malcolm X was like my hero before I was a Christian, and I was a history major, and the 1960s. That whole vibe was like very inspiring to me about changing the world, but I began to be very disenfranchised with what I saw in the world with these different movements or different things. And then that kind of led me to seek God. When I became a Christian and saw discipleship, I mean, it really impacted me. Like, this was Jesus's plan for world change. And my campus minister at the time, his name was Chip Mitchell. And he leads the Philadelphia church now, and he's a dear friend. And he is this, and I was a college student, and I would, I'd sit in, I remember, through some of those years, you'd sit down with him at 10 a.m. and be in a Bible study with a friend that I had brought to my campus minister, learning how to study the Bible and use the Bible in a way that would change someone's life. And then that Bible study would end, and I'd say to Chip, what are you doing from the rest of the day? And he'd say, I have a Bible study at noon, Bible study at 2, Bible study at 4. And I remember in those early days, if I didn't have class, and even sometimes if I did, I'd say, hey, you mind if I just hang out here? And watching that up close and personal, and seeing people's lives change through the Word of God, and seeing God sort of be really active and alive in that process. I mean, my own conversion story, I feel very much this way. And when I get to experience other people's conversions, I still feel this way, that God is a living God. He's active in this world. And I love seeing that and being a part of that. And I think at that early age, that was why I wanted to go into the ministry. I love studying the Bible with people. I loved the idea of helping others. And so I graduated, and the minister at her church, his name was Jimmy Allen, and he's still in New England leading churches here. But he asked me to, when I graduated, if I wanted to go be a campus minister. And so I did that. I graduated on whatever it was, May 24th. And on June 1st, I was campus minister in her campus ministry. We were already dating. At the time, but and we did that for 7 months and helped a bunch of people become Christians. And then about 7 months later, the church in Boston, because we were in Hartford, Connecticut, the church in Boston was looking to really revamp the campus ministry. And so they sort of asked us, it wasn't really being asked back then, but they kind of asked us to move to Boston to learn campus ministry and to do that. So she actually became a minister while she was still in school. We got married while she was still a student. She was basically in the ministry, kind of finishing up her schooling while the campus ministers at BU and BC.
Yeah. And I think for me, again, I felt inspired growing up, watching my parents, watching other heroes in the ministry, seeing lives changed. And I remember helping a friend become a Christian in high school, and the joy of seeing how the Bible worked in people's lives and the way that it was able to transform. We had family next door become Christians, a son in my grade and another in my sister's grade, and the whole family became Christians. And I think seeing what the Bible did to bring families together, to change people's lives, to give people purpose. Going into college, I debated wanting to go into broadcast journalism or writing, had passions in that area. But I think I just felt like, what else could I do that I would love more than getting to make an impact and just see people's lives changed with all of my time. So I think it pretty quickly for me, I got disillusioned by, the media and what it could offer as hope, and quickly felt like I don't want to do anything else, and fell in love with a man who wanted the same dreams.
Yeah.
Which was such a blessing.
So I remember as a college student, when I was leading my first Bible talk, not the discussion itself, but this group of young Christians, that I was also a young Christian. I remember that they were coming over to my apartment for like me to host a Let's Change the World talk, and what are we going to do this semester? And And I remember I came up with First Samuel 17, David and Goliath, and let's inspire the other warriors who are watching Goliath. And I remember having this whole talk about let's go evangelize, and insecure and nervous, is this going to do anything? And then like that next week, one of the guys in my Bible talk, his name is Kevin, and he lived with me at the time. We were in an apartment off campus. He shared his faith with this guy named John. And then I'm gonna have to remember this correctly because it's such a crazy story. He shared his faith with this guy named John. John gave him his number. He called John because John said he was interested. He was a grad student at UMass. John said he was interested in studying the Bible. Kevin dialed the wrong number and left a message for this other guy whose name was also John about, hey, I know you're interested in studying the Bible. So call me at this number. So this other John gets the message and actually is interested in looking for a Bible discussion. He calls my apartment asking for Kevin. I pick up the phone. I have no idea who this person is because I'm the wrong Kevin. We end up figuring all this out. John gets baptized. He's like a 35-year-old. His wife gets baptized. His teen daughter gets baptized. And I thought, this all came from a Bible verse that I shared with a group of guys in my dorm, my apartment building. It was things like that made me want to give my life up for to do the ministry.
Wow. Okay, so then you led the campus ministry for 13 years together, and then you've been leading the downtown ministry for 7 years, and then the last year or so you've been leading the Boston church. Is that right?
That is about right. Yeah, we moved in '99 to Boston, and we didn't come here sort of leading the entire ministry. We moved here. We really, Randy McKean and Kay were sort of training Chip and Ruby Mitchell, who were discipling the campus ministers, and we were one of them. And we led kind of a segment of the Boston campus ministry. And then about 3 or 4 years later, we took it over. So we probably took it over at about the worst moment, 2004. Things were a total disaster, and they were a disaster from 03, 04, 05, 06. We really started to see things.
We were questioning that question you just asked us.
Oh yeah.
Why did we go in the ministry?
Right.
Yeah, different question. Why do we stay in the ministry?
Right.
It became a very quick question. But in 04, 05, in the midst of a lot of church turmoil, that we were, we took it over. And I would say from like 04, 05 to when we came out, for the next 10 years, 15 years, we really saw a revival in the campuses downtown. And then in 2014, we became the region leader for the downtown region, where the campus ministry resides. I mean, the downtown ministry campus is in the downtown region, so we kind of became and then we did that for about 7 years before we were asked to lead the entire Boston church.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I just have got to ask, you've had some really great disciplers, obviously. What was it like getting discipled by Doug Arthur?
I have said to people that there are some people that have trained and discipled me that it when we were having fun, it felt like work. With Doug, it was exactly the opposite. It was a lot of while you were working, it just felt like you were really, most of those years, it was just a total blast. Now I feel like, and I really have deep convictions about this. I mean, from Jimmy and Anita Allen discipled us, Chip and Ruby Mitchell discipled us, Randy and Kay McKean for a period of time sort of discipled us, and certainly Doug was a huge influence in my life and in terms of raising me up. Mike and Scarlett Van Auken are the chairman of the eldership in Boston. They've discipled us at different times. Richard and Lillian Hislop, who are region leaders in the Boston Church at times, discipled us. Now we get a lot of discipling from Jimmy and Maria Rogers, A.T. and Marcy Arneson, who lead the Chicago church, kind of help. And I really feel like we've been really blessed with some amazing people and I believe that it's the Holy Spirit that moves in that process. I really believe that. You have to, if those relationships are going to go well, you have to trust that God is involved, or else things don't go quite as well. And Doug was certainly a huge influence in my life. And I think probably the biggest influences in my life, the thing I feel, so blessed is Wyndham Shaw's influence in my life. I mean, my father-in-law, who was just who helped to kind of even convert Doug down in the Carolinas when he was building churches out of Crossroads there. But, Wyndham's influence in my life has been huge. I was one time helping my older brother, who was a disciple, and we were talking about his marriage and I was helping with a couple of things, and we were talking it through. This is a few years ago. And after the conversation was kind of ending and he felt very helped, and I was sort of thinking, wow, those were some great answers I was giving about this. And my brother said, man, it's great that you married into Wyndham's family, because otherwise you would never be able to help me with all of these things. and I laughed and thought, that's certainly true. So I've been really blessed to have some incredibly influential people in my life, and that's a whole list of them. But
you seem to inspire us a culture of spiritual ambition. I talked to a person who visited your church this past year, and the thing he shared, he said, I talked to a lot of people, number of different people, a lot of young guys, and almost every person I talked to said, I want to go into the ministry. Young men, young women wanting to pursue the ministry. How do you do that? How do you create that kind of culture?
I think that's a great word, culture. I do think that's it's not an accident when those cultures exist. I think they have to be built. But I guess, I don't exactly know the answer. I'll give you an answer that I think I guess works in my mind. But I really believe that God is real. And I believe that because he's real, his living presence helps us to have victory in our lives. And I mean that in the evangelism, not perfect lives, not lives without challenges. In fact, a lot of times, obviously being a Christian brings more trouble on your head sometimes, but I mean, in terms of evangelistically, I think that, and I think we believe in it. The idea of a person, a young man, and I feel like, boy, so many experience a Christianity that is like, okay, let's have a Bible talk. And they sit in a Bible talk and nobody comes, and it's discouraging and demoralizing. And maybe so, it's, and evangelism itself is such it can be such a discouraging a pursuit. I mean, it's like baseball, it's like success in baseball is failing 7 out of 10 times. If you bat 300, that's a success, but that means you're failing 7 times out of 10. And evangelism is worse than that by a bazillion times. And yet I think that God does move. And I think when we can help people, young people or any people, taste, we train people. This is, let's go share our faith. Let's have those deep relationships. If they trust me, let's go share our faith together. I'm talking to Christians, kingdom kids, not kingdom kids, Gentiles. And if we get out there and, they're doing it because we're encouraging them, this is how it's done. But once someone meets somebody and that person becomes a Christian and they see that person's life change, and it ceases to be something that someone told me to do or some theory about how the world changes, but they actually get to up close and personal see somebody's life change. And I think I try to gather people that have that experience. And I don't think everybody should go into the ministry. I don't think everybody has that gift, and nor do they need to. And that's not the only good gift in God's church. But people do need to pursue it, and there are people that need to be raised up for it. And I think because we're trying to create that culture of victory in evangelism, and people are experiencing that, I think that's why we get people that raise their hand and say, I'd want to give up my MIT engineering degree, and I'd want to give up my BU or whatever UMass Boston degree to try to do this. And I think that that's a big part of it. I don't know if you have a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I look at a lot of young people today, I think there are a lot of young people who have a lot of ambition and who want to do great things and change the world. And I know, like Kevin said, we've had amazing trainers in our life and such incredible experiences, but we also did go through a time in the church where spiritual ambition was very competitive, and it was, kind of a dog-eat-dog world. And it just was burdensome, pressurized, and yet there was still this mission of people needing to become Christians, but we had to figure out how to do it in the right way. And I think we have learned and been taught and learned through our own lessons and mistakes and life. I think, young people who want to do great things, they need, they have expectations of themselves. And I think in the ministry, you've got to have high expectations for people, but you've got to also have very close relationships with people and building a spirit of unity, where that's what I even love about the group right now. We've got an incredibly ambitious group of young ministers, but they are so connected and united with each other and for each other. And so they work very hard, but I think they enjoy doing it. The friendships are there. It's an atmosphere where we're for each other, where we celebrate each other's victories. And that creates something where you see God moving and people's lives being changed, and you're all in it together. It's a family, it's victories you're sharing with each other. And I think it's a lesson that so much of the church had to learn, but to be able to harness that together and bring both the family and the relationships where people feel affirmed and believed in and encouraged and built up, and that they can use their own unique gifts, and everyone's got different sets of them, but figuring out how they can use what they have to make a difference and have fun and connection with each other and with those training them in the process. I think it's a good balance that has worked well here.
So high expectations plus developing a close family feel. Doing a little research on you, that's one of the things that was shared about you guys, is that there is a church culture of close-knit, deep relationships. And that's pretty impressive, that's the kind of reputation that you have. I know you've got to be a Boston fan, but when I was thinking about both of you guys, I thought it seems almost like you guys are Yankees fans, because you seem to have the knack for attracting some really amazing talent or free agents to Boston. I mean, Stuart and Ashley Maines, Brian and Christine Campbell, Glenn Petruzzi, Chaz and Olivia Zentano. I start hearing these names going to Boston. I'm like, oh my gosh, his salary cap must be super high, and he's just like stacking it. I mean, it's pretty awesome. Tell me, what's driving that? Okay, was this like a master plan, or was it just like, hey, the opportunity came up? Talk about that, please.
Well, first of all, curse your tongue for talking to me about being a Yankee fan. That's definitely not the case. And Boston's won 4 world championships, and the Yankees have only won 1 since 2000. And Boston brought in a lot of good free agents. But no, I think, of course, I've only been the lead evangelist for the Boston church for the last year and a half. And so in terms of some big grand plan, that wasn't really the seat exactly that I was sitting in. But I think there is, I'd say, what Melissa just shared, I think is a piece. We've preached this a few different times lately. Unity is not easy, and because we're all different. And my wife and I are so different in our gift sets, in the way we think about things. And we talk about, we've always been good for the church because we do bring such different gifts, as long as we don't kill each other, in the process as we're bringing them. And I think there has been this sense as people have come in, I don't think it works. I don't think it's a very productive environment for people if it's high expectations with low connection. And I also obviously don't think it's a very good, productive environment if it's high connection without any expectations. That doesn't work either. It works to have friendships, but that's not what we're trying to do. That's not just what we're trying to do. We're trying to change the world. And I think that's what we're trying to build here. Very high expectations. I think when you have those without the relationships, people burn out, people get isolated, people get into trouble, people do stupid things, and they get, and also when it's just relationships without expectation, expectations are dangerous. Having high expectations and high production. I just came from a region leaders meeting with the leaders, the 9 region leaders of the Boston church. These are 64-year-olds down to 35-year-olds. and we were setting evangelism goals, for the month. And we don't do that every month, but these men are willing to do these sort of challenging things. And I think we need to bring a little bit more of that back, but it only works, I think, because we are able to talk, and there is that connection with each other. And that's what I think these young ones have shared. I think one of the things that they felt as they've come in is there is training. We did I don't need to get into that yet. I think you might ask a question, but anyway, that would probably be my piece there. I don't know if Melissa would add to that.
I hope that people can feel safe. I think we want people to feel taken care of and that they're coming into a family. And certainly I didn't come into this role having wanting anything to do with this being something that we just did by ourselves, or that we felt like we just knew what we were doing with. And I think the idea that we can have transparency and be okay with our weaknesses, and that people know them and can feel safe to talk to us about them, and vice versa, it creates an atmosphere where we know what we want to be, but we can talk to each other about where we're not and feel very safe and loved through the whole process of it. I think Kevin has always, this is one of the things he's taught me the most in our marriage, just in vulnerability and transparency. You grow up as a kingdom kid and you feel like, to whom much has been given, much is demanded. And, you feel like you should know what you're doing. And because I've been given so much, I should have it all together. And I had to learn early on, marrying this guy and our very opposite personalities. We fought, and it was the whole new world to me of going, oh my goodness, conflict and seeing my weaknesses. But I think it taught me from him early on that we would die if we weren't transparent with people. And all I got back was affirmation of love and people feeling more connected. The uglier we were, the more connected people felt, which, was a new thing for me. But I think it has helped us, saved us in our marriage. But I think it's what we want to bring to the ministry here, and want people to feel like, no, you can grow and you can have weaknesses, and we can all have different strengths. But as long as we're open about it and willing to grow, and it be a safe place to do that, where we can feel loved and believed in, then yeah, let's go change the world together. It works well.
No, and I would also just add, I remember when Brian Campbell interviewed here, and I think it was when he was interviewing, it might've been after he had already come and decided to be here, but he was talking with the people that were interviewing him, which was me, but it was also, we have 65-year-old region leaders and 60-year-old, and they're amazing people. And they were sharing with Brian, I think it was Brian, how excited they were for him to come in and take over. And he, and rise to be the region leader that succeeds Mike Van Auken has just become the chairman of the elders for the Boston Church. He's a region leader in the region that Brian's in. So probably that is in transition. It's already been made public. He hasn't taken over yet, but he came to me and said, wow. And I had been lead evangelist here for like 6 months at the time. And he said, wow, you've really done a great job of helping the culture here to be such about succession. And I quickly said, that is not me. That the reality is the elders and the region leaders of the Boston Church, the senior people, it's why they hired us. I mean, I'm not young, I'm 46, but I'm not 60 either. And that they gave this job to someone that was much, younger than even some of the other people that were interviewing. I think there is this sense in Boston, like, now we just want to give it to anybody. You got to be ready to take the torch if you're going to take it. And I think sometimes that's a lesson in and of itself, but I think that there is this spirit in Boston of, let's go. How can we create? And it doesn't mean even the guys are retiring, but they might be stepping into a different role to let a younger guy step into the lead role in a particular region or place. And I feel like that spirit here is very evident and strong. And I feel like the young people have felt it and seen it. And they've made comments that it doesn't feel like that's the general vibe in all of the places that they might see and experience.
Right.
We're spoiled. I feel blessed upon blessed to be with the staff we have here, even to come in and being 10 years younger than a lot of the region leaders that we're leading. And they have had nothing but a spirit of support, encouragement, our biggest fans, and wanting to do it well for the church, as they're getting older. It's not pass the torch. It's we're going to keep ours lit, but let's give it to this next generation eagerly, willingly, excitedly. And it's just beyond even what I can explain how wonderful that atmosphere is to have in our senior leaders here.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Boston has had some high volume, high intensity preachers. I've heard them called screamers. Where does that come from? Okay, I know this is Kevin, I've heard you preach. You're pretty high volume yourself. I heard you back in 2009. You did a lesson for the leaders. I think it was in a Denver leadership conference. I cried.
Mm.
I heard that lesson. I was sitting in the back with my wife, and we were leading our own church. I was selling real estate at the time and leading a church planting in Oregon, and I cried. I mean, that rarely happens. I mean, I can remember that time, maybe when I was a young Christian, but I remember you talking about, hey, listen, if you're leading your church and you're the player manager, you got to get out there and you got to swing. You got to do it yourself. And I was so convicted. I mean, it moved me, and I felt people's eyes looking at me like, what is the matter with this guy? But I just bowed my head after that lesson and just wept because I was so convicted, because it'd been a while since I'd met anybody who'd become a Christian. Now, I was planting my own church. I was really trying to do the best I could, but it touched me. And at that time, you were a younger person. You're 10 years younger than me. And for the first time, I felt like I'm in my 40s and getting older. And it just was a sword right through me. Tell me, where does this come from? This intensity? Talk about that, please.
If you're talking about volume, then
that's genetics.
Then that might be genetic, because I was on a walk in the neighborhood with my wife last week, and we were talking, and she said, "Why are you yelling right now?" I'm
the
just
whole neighborhood.
loud.
I kid you not. Kevin has Zoom meetings, and we're working on getting a basement door. But he will be in the basement, and I will be 2 floors up in my room with the door closed on another Zoom meeting, and we can all hear him.
Yeah. So the volume is one thing, and that's probably, but I actually don't think that's what you're asking me about exactly. I don't think. I think what you're asking me, when I read my Bible and when I look at the world, when I read my Bible, the description it gives for the role that I'm supposed to play is preacher, proclaimer, herald, prophet, and things, and teacher as well, and those kind of things. But those words, those are words. I mean, when you read the scriptures about Jesus's sermons, or John the Baptist's sermons, to me, it's very hard. I mean, absolutely, we are to encourage and comfort, and the word of God is so empowering. I totally believe that. But it also says correct and rebuke, and there are these things in there, and there's an edge. I have a biblical conviction that's what these preachers and proclaimers are supposed to be. And when I look at the world and look at the church, and I love the church. I love the international churches of Christ. I just think it's gold. I think it's just so wonderful. Always things we have to change. And honestly, sometimes when I walk into church, I have to turn my brain off when I want to worship. I'm not looking to critique the sermon and whoever's preaching. I want to worship, but there's plenty of things that have to change. And when I look at the world and the need that is in, we did for our staff meetings last year, from September to December through December of 2021, we were talking about building momentum, and we were studying out the books of Ezra and Nehemiah and Haggai and Zechariah. And I love that era. I love that period. And it talks about how the work stalled, that the builders stopped building. And I think it's Ezra chapter 4. And then these prophets came in, and it says their preaching strengthened these people, and they got to work again. And of course, you can read what's going on in Haggai and Zechariah, but we did a whole staff meeting on this. And we had Larry Reed. I asked Larry Reed. Larry Reed is one of the region leaders here in the Boston church. He's one of my dear friends. He's an amazing evangelist, and he is an amazing preacher. And I said, just do a lesson for us on just preaching that inspires, that pushes. And he did this lesson on passionate preaching, and he just went off. I mean, he was preaching to the staff. He was preaching to the young staff, and he was going off. And then we kind of responded in the staff meeting, and people were sharing. And one of the guys that got up and shared was Jimmy Rogers, who's also an old 65-year-old preacher. And Jimmy at one point was sharing just conviction, and he was being vulnerable, but he turned to the young preachers. He turned to the 35-year-olds and the 30-year-olds and the campus ministers who are 20, the Stuart Mainses and the Brian Campbells and the Austin Bolduses of the world. And he just said, guys, you got to make aggressive mistakes. Don't almost say something. I mean, he really was that. And after the meeting was over, and even in the midst of the meeting, some of those guys came up and said, it's been a long time since we heard older preachers telling us to sort of make those bold, aggressive mistakes. And that, I didn't know that was true. It sort of surprised me, but it does feel to me like, this is a biblical conviction. I mean, I think we need to, I think that's what I see when I look at Jesus, and that's what I see when I look at Paul and certainly Jeremiah and those guys, that there was, there's conviction that's got to come, and it takes courage. It takes walking that lonely road, and it takes having people in your life. And we're not, that's why we need so much help and input. We need to be transparent ourselves. But I one time listened to a preacher, and you could tell he wasn't doing well. And he was preaching through 1 Samuel 17, David and Goliath. And he had his arm on the pulpit and his hand on his face. And I sat there and I thought, this is so unbelievably boring. And how do you make 1 Samuel 17 boring? And I just don't think that's what God intended.
Give me 3 points that you think would improve people's preaching. If let's say a person's leading a smaller ministry, coming out of COVID, you got to revive the ministry. People are in disarray spiritually all over the map. Give me some bullet points.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me, and it's hard for me not to start with this. You have to love the Bible. I mean, you just have to love the Bible. You got to read the Bible. And I'm so thrilled to be on this podcast, and my campus ministers know about this podcast. I said, you're going on the Rob Skinner podcast? I said, yeah. So I think it's awesome. But I feel like so much of the generation that I talk to, it's like they're not reading the Bible. They're listening to a podcast about the Bible or something. And I'm not against those things that can enlighten, but I think you got to memorize scripture. I've got the entire book of Romans memorized. I've got the entire book of 2 Timothy memorized. I got Psalms memorized, half of it. I have to have it in me. If you don't have it in you, then you're not going to have an accurate read on what you're looking at. When it comes to the church and the needs of the church. I think that's probably the first thing I would say. I think good preaching brings the Bible to life. And, I think good preaching has, when I train my young preachers, every Sunday we sit with college kids or campus ministers, and we do little, intern meetings, not little intern meetings, they're awesome. But we have a student preaching section where you have to, somebody comes in with a 5-minute lesson, and they give it 5 minutes, and then for 5 minutes we critique them. And it's always really encouraging. And then when that person's preaching, I give someone a scripture. They have to go into the back room and in 5 minutes write a lesson. And then they come in and we critique them too. But I always talk about explanation, illustration, application. And that's what I was taught, right? You got to explain the Bible well. You tell us what was happening. Tell us what Jesus was saying. Tell us what the original hearers would be hearing when they're talking about it. And then you got to illustrate. Jesus told parables. Jesus told stories, and they're not just for entertainment. They're to bring things to life. And you got to illustrate, and you got to show. It's not just explain the whole time. But then there's application, and application is where Paul's telling Timothy, correct, rebuke, encourage. And I think that's where it's not just theories. The preacher needs to say to the congregation, and now it's one thing when you say, Evangelism is a good thing, but it's another thing to say evangelism is a good thing and you have got to take it higher. You aren't doing it this way. There's got to be a you, and we can get crazy with that, but I think good preaching has those three elements. Illustration, application, and application first, to really bring the Bible, let God's word speak to people. I always think fearlessness and boldness, and courage. That's the world we're in. And it's funny. I mean, public speaking is like people would rather, it's one of the number one fears, public speaking. And preachers not only are public speakers, but they're actually public speakers that need to actually sometimes call, inspire, and sober a congregation. So you walk off the stage and you've done that. That's a lonely hour right there.
That's right.
Sometimes the best preaching is not going to be the stuff that makes everybody laugh. And so it's a scary thing. And that's why it requires a lot of courage. And I also, last thing I guess I would say to this question is getting other preachers and other church leaders in your life to look at your church, to look at your preaching, to listen to your preaching. We did this last year with the region leaders of the Boston church. It's a very humble group of men, but we tagged everybody up. Everybody had to have a friend who was going to listen to one of their sermons and then give them good point, bad point. And then they needed to bring that good point, bad point to the region leaders meeting. And we shared about it. And we're laughing and it's fun and it's hilarious, but it's real. Yep. And I think you got to have other people that have that same view. They're church builders, they're church leaders. You got to have them take a look at what your church looks like and how your sermons sound. I think that's invaluable information.
You guys led the campus ministry for a long time, and you're still actively involved in it. What advice would you give for energizing campus ministry in the 2020s?
We have a campus going. We were going into last semester with 65 college students downtown, which is woefully small. It's just so, and we brought some ministers down, and that's the area that I'm kind of focusing my time and attention in terms of training. And I met a guy at BU last semester who became a Christian, and I'm all fired up about that. But in last semester, those 65 students baptized 18 kids, and we're up at 90 now. And our goal is to get to 300. And my advice would be, first, people are as open today as they've been at any other. I mean, you hear all this stuff, and how to reach a millennial and how to reach this, as though people in the 70s and 80s were just like naturally wanting to flock into churches. And it wasn't, right? Jesus, you had courageous souls sharing their faith with tons of people. And the hardworking farmer should be the first to receive a share of the crops. And, we work hard to meet people. I think that there's many people in this city, and I believe that, and we're seeking seekers. And I believe that. And I think, I do think our campus ministries need to get more reoriented. I think we need the mix of Gentile and sort of kingdom kid, the Jew Gentile mix that God sort of talks about in the book of Ephesians, that coming together mix. I think we're not mixed the right way in a lot of our ministries now, and in these sort of the church kid element, and we've built the back. Some of our most courageous, effective campus students and campus ministers are kingdom kids. So I don't want to give the wrong impression, but this idea that the way to reach these kids is to sort of lower standards and to sort of everything's this internal conversation with the church about all these sort of peripheral issues. I think we need to preach Jesus. We need to find a few students that are willing to do that. And Jonathan and his armor bearer need to get out there on our campus, and 2 people turn into 5 people, turn into 10 people as the semesters go on. And to me, I know people say it's old school and all that kind of stuff, but to me, it's just preaching the word on campus and being courageous and finding victory and learning how to study the Bible with people. I think that's what's amazing about campus ministry. You can become an expert in how to study the Bible with a non-Christian, because there's just so many there. And so many people, it's such a willing age demographic to sit down with these non-Christians. And this idea of meeting someone, I love when this happens. When even some kingdom kid who's only used to the people that they've seen become Christians are the children of members in the church, and that's awesome. But the idea, the first time this kingdom kid from the teen ministries now to campus ministry, and they met someone that was a complete stranger to them 3 weeks ago, and now they're a disciple and they're one of their soulmate best friends. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. But I just think that's it. The opportunity for that exists as much right now as it ever has, and we need courageous souls who'll go out there and share. I don't know, Melissa, you would share anything.
Kevin,
yeah,
I can hear someone saying, well, that's easy for you to say, Kevin. You don't come from the church. You have a salesman type personality. You're a real aggressive type, outgoing extrovert. And that style doesn't work. That kind of straight ahead, let's just go meet a ton of people, that doesn't work. I want to hear what the Kingdom Kid says, what Melissa has to say, and see what her view is on this.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what he was saying, I would share, but add a perspective to it, because I think this idea of our campus ministries today, we do have a lot of Kingdom Kids. Certainly, we're huge fans of Kingdom Kids. Our children are the Kingdom Kids of Kingdom Kids, grandparents on both sides. And I think there's so much wisdom and stability that is brought in from Kingdom Kids. And I think you bring in those that are converted from the world, and the gratitude of being in the world and being changed by Jesus is so apparent to these people who become Christians. And so it's really this beautiful blend when you can bring them together. But I think these Kingdom Kids have got to come in and feel safe and feel like that we've won their trust, that they can trust, that they can be heard. Because again, I think even in this generation, I don't really think this generation is struggling with saying what they feel or having a lot of opinions. And that can be a great thing, as long as we create an atmosphere where they can talk and feel listened to and heard, and know how to win trust and help them feel safe, to also make sure that their opinions and perspectives are really biblically based. And I think that's the part with these Kingdom Kids, and certainly what I had to learn in being safe to be real. And again, to be able to be honest with, hey, I don't like all these evangelism goals or talking like that. And well, why? And what do you think of? And, because I think we also know how to put on a good front. We've seen how to do it our whole lives. And so I think being able to go, it's okay if you don't know what you're doing, and what you're bringing adds so much. And how can we, because the Gentile kids who are coming in full of gratitude have also a lot of times grown up in broken families, and get to come in to see some of these relationships and families that a lot of the Kingdom Kids have, and again, really be able to learn from each other and have best friendships. And I think it's also cultivating if you're a great relationship builder, there's so much that can happen in your classes and with the friends that you meet. Although I've also seen, on the other hand, I think when you've got big teen ministries, it can be easy to be a little bit insular and only know how to have relationships with other Kingdom Kids.
Right.
And so I think there's also got to be a training of, we're not going to get worldly, but how do you become and befriend these students and kids who don't have spiritual convictions, and then from those friendships be able to turn that into really sharing Jesus with people, that it's not just going to be, I think Kingdom Kids have to be won over sometimes. That we're not just sharing out pamphlets for a Bible talk, but it can be, we're sharing our lives. People can see that change. We can have friendships that turn into becoming Christians. And I think that's a whole side that we've had to learn and work at helping these kids feel so validated and understand what their gifts and what they bring to the table, while cultivating a humility and learning to share your opinions, but also go, it's okay to need to learn and to have weaknesses. is a good thing, that's only helping us all to learn how to be more like Jesus. And then it creates a culture once you start seeing people become Christians on both sides, sharing your faith wildly and having, you know, friends in your class that in your dorm that become Christians,
right,
that you start seeing, okay, this is an amazing thing.
No, and I would just add to what I said. In a campus ministry, you need the courageous, you need those sort of Davids, but as a campus minister, and my advice to campus ministers would be the idea that freshmen are coming in from a teen ministry and have never done this before in this way that we would think about it, and is completely frightening to a lot of these kids. That the campus minister needs to be the pace setting guy, but he also needs to be the mom and the dad. You know, my history when I'm campus minister is I've got the seniors and the juniors and the sophomores who kind of know what we're doing and have worked into it. But I'm just hanging with the freshmen. We're having a great time. And then maybe, and I don't even tell the freshmen when I get with them, hey, we're going to go share our faith, because they might not show up. But if they knew I was taking them out, but we'll go get lunch. They'll say, hey, why don't we go share our faith for a minute? And then I go and share my faith with 15 people while this person stands next to me. And I remember Niles Radel. He's not in the ministry, but he's a father in the Boston church now. But I remember when he's a Kingdom kid, and the first time he shared his faith on campus, and I said, after I'd shared my faith with like 15 people, and then say, Niles, all right, that one person over there, why don't you go share your faith with that person? And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? and I said, you can do it. Come on, you can do it. I'm gonna stand over here. You go just go invite him to church. Say whatever you want to say. And I saw him go up, and he had his little conversation, and then he kind of walked back to me, and I don't know whether the guy was open or not, but I'm standing back there like, you did it, man. You are just like Jesus.
That's right.
You know,
that's right.
We are, and he's laughing, and we're having a great time. That's what it's like to be in my campus ministry.
Right.
That this is not like these kids show up in September 1st from some teen ministry, and they're scared to death because there's all these expectations, and you better get with it. The Kingdom kids have to have a willingness to grow.
Right.
But the campus ministers need to know that we're going to develop these kids, and the atmosphere that helps them grow is there's zeal, there's pace setters, there's people going for it, but there's a safety and a family that says, this is okay that you're not the all-star in this, but just, hey, let's be willing to try a little bit. And I think when you get that mixture together, people can grow. And so I have to say that because I speak the way I speak. And so people feel like I would never want to go near that guy's ministry, but that's not what it's like to be in our campus ministry, because we're having a blast doing this. And the Kingdom kids are as well. The Kingdom kids are just the lifeblood of so many of our revivals. And back in 2006, 2007, when we were on our backs as a ministry, and campus ministers back then, and probably still, but back then there weren't a lot of, that was kind of the Kingdom kids were just kind of coming to the fore, and campus ministers would say to me what I had felt at times, which is, you can't build a campus ministry with Kingdom kids. And I completely disagree with that. I think that's not true. It just they have to have some humility. They got to learn how to do this thing. But some of the most revolutionary, heroic people that I know that I still consider my best friends were Kingdom kids that learned how to do this. But the atmosphere within which these ministries have to teach it have got to have these combinations of zeal and fervor, but family and safety, so that people can kind of grow.
A lot of validation and affirmation.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah. It's not one size fits all. You really have to have both. I love your attitude. And I think about Glenn Petruzzi. I always wonder, are you guys related or something? You guys remind me a lot of each other, but I think about and have heard about your work at Harvard and reaching out there, and it's very inspiring. But I agree with you. I think there has to be a militant, straight ahead approach and a faith that says the fields are ripe for harvest in 2022, just as it was in 1992. There, it's got to be, there are open people out there. You guys have stepped into some massive shoes. I don't know what the current size of Boston is. Is it 2,000, 3,000, or
2,200?
Okay, so you got 2,000 people. I remember reading a book saying the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. You guys got into the ministry because you love to study the Bible with people, have consecutive Bible study appointments. Now you're leading a group of 9 region leaders. You've got an elders group. You've got, so many different ministries within your ministry. Talk about the transition to stepping into this type of a role.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's I think it's a question that anybody that's in a role like mine has to be haunted by all the time, because it's so easy to be the business meeting guy and to all of those kinds of things. And I actually feel like it is my role to help the region leaders to keep the main thing. I mean, that's really what I've got to, we have these meetings and as I've watched the role in the past, and it's so easy to let every region leaders meeting be about the calendar, the agenda, the upcoming meeting that we have to plan, the budget, this, that, and you just go through just gigantic stretches of time, and you haven't talked about the harvest, how we do in building a harvest. I mean, I just came from a region leaders meeting just now where that's what we were doing. We were setting evangelism goals. We were talking about building an accountable culture in each of our regions, and what do we think about that? But keeping that conversation at the fore is so huge. But for me, it's also, I mean, that my answer would be, and you're not asking me what's hard about leading a huge church. You're asking me, how do I stay focused? And for me, I've got to have a place. This is my ministry. I don't, and for me, it's the campus ministry. I lead the campus ministry. I'm the lead evangelist of the Boston church. So I'm running the staff and all these things. But the downtown campus and training those people and being involved and being in Bible studies and sharing my faith and going, that's I have to be somewhere, or else it's hard for me to maintain an inspiration that the church can grow and that the culture can change if my own faith is not being fed by what God is doing in some place that I'm plugged into. And for me right now, that is the campus. That is the campus ministry. And I've led other regions, but that's probably my first answer. My wife is actually incredible, I would say, at this. The idea of becoming lead evangelist and women's ministry leader was not something that was initially like, this is so thrilling to me, because you're talking to me now about I'm working with staff a lot more than working with my neighbors and and this was a conversation that we had to have, and it's something that she's deeply passionate about.
And for me, I just feel like the grassroots and what I love is working with people. It's certainly helping people become Christians, but it's also the relational, just helping people feel closer to Jesus and encouraging and believing in people. And so, we transitioned into this role. It was the week, I think we got the call that we got the job on November 15th. My birthday was November 17th, and my dad's 1-year passing anniversary was a couple days after that. And so it had been a whirlwind, and obviously COVID and a bunch of other things, as we all know. And so it already felt like a lot of loss to me. And I think the idea of leaving my region role, where I was constantly, it was just being with people and going to a lot more meetings and working with a lot more staff who are amazing. It was a hard few months just trying to figure out the first 6 months. And I think for me, it did go back to, I have to have my place where I am doing the things that I love and the things that as you said, first made me fall in love with the ministry. And so I think I had to create really good boundaries and rhythms to go, I have to have time where I am plugged into my community, where I am taking time to be with my neighbors and friendships and doing the things that keep me connected to being in love with Jesus and getting again, so many more meetings, so many more early mornings. And yet I think I just had to make sure I held on to, I've got to walk with God and be very, very close to him and make sure I'm getting my strength from there, but have all my same, swimming holes of where I was going to plug in and be able to be with people who I know need Jesus, and that I felt like could be back still doing that same grassroots kind of stuff, because otherwise I was just getting weary and burdened and feeling like, meetings don't fill you up. And I think as well, trying to build that with the women in Boston to keep us very relationally close and connected, and it not just being meetings, but something that fed our hearts and helped us to inspire each other to stay faithful and, in our mission and purpose to be close to God and help other people.
No, I sort of feel like in our own churches and at the International Church of Christ level, you get in a position like this in Boston, leading the Boston Church, and there's been a lot of phone calls of, we need you on this committee and we need you to do that. And I'm so unbelievably grateful for those that are serving in those roles. And I'm sure that I will serve in those roles at some point. But my answer is not right now. I can't. Boston's been 2,200 people or 2,300 people or 2,100 people or 2,200 people or 2,100 people for 20 years. We've been this way. And I love the church. And that is not uncharacteristic of most of our churches in our movement. So Boston's not anything that anybody else is not struggling with. And what we really need is not someone that can pull on all the different strings and conversations that things that get fixed. We need some models of growth. We need some examples of healthy churches.
Right.
This is burning on me. If at 2030, we are 2,200 people, I am that cannot be what God wants.
That's right.
It just cannot be what God wants. And so that sort of helps me because I feel haunted by it. And I know that it's not easy. And if it was easy, then we'd have done it a long time ago. It's not easy with all the distractions and all the different things and all the history and all the stuff, but it drives me because I feel like it's just such a need.
Melissa, let me ask you this. How have you managed to cope with the passing of your dad during all this transition?
It's day by day, but I feel like I think one of the hardest, but also best lessons we learn as a Christian is that we can't learn without going through the suffering. And as much as it has been the worst thing in my life to lose my dad, it has undoubtedly been where I've seen myself grow and learn more than I would have. And so I think it's making sure that I'm taking the space to be sad when I need to be sad. But I remember a conversation that my dad had with me. He had something similar to ALS, so it took everything from him but his mind. But while he could still speak, we had a conversation, the two of us, in his living room, where he just said, I hope, and yet I can also, I hope that I will always know how much he loves me, which I do. But, he said, my only fear is that I don't ever want what I'm going through to affect yours or your grandchildren's or my grandchildren's faith. And I love that I can be a rock and a refuge for you, but you don't need me. God's got to be your everything and enough. And we both, I can cry now, but we both cried through that time. But I think he was helping me. My dad was the most amazing man that I know. But I think how he died may have been one of his greatest legacies, in the way that he, another conversation while he still had his speech of just going, I've done what I wanted to do in my generation with my faith, and I get to go be with God now. And I think it gave me a perspective of what I had and what I have as a father relationship, taught me everything I knew and know about God, but that I needed God to be enough and God to be my strength. And I think after he died, we went through a really tumultuous time in the church and in the world with COVID and all the racial and social injustices. And I had to wrestle. It was the hardest time I've ever gone through in my faith. And yet it has brought me to a deeper place with God, where I think prayerfully and hopefully I can also relate to pain more, but has taught me more about God's strength than I could have ever imagined, where I feel like he is my refuge and my rock. And I miss my dad every day, but feel like the greatest lesson of making God what gets me through everything is one I know I'm going to keep learning, but one that I feel eternally grateful to be God's daughter.
Wow. Thank you. What advice would you guys give to someone who wanted to make this life count?
I mean, I would say very simply, love God. And I don't mean to be simple. I really don't. When I think of that 20-year-old in 1995, and I think about the life that I get to live today, I very much feel like, how did the boundary lines fall like this for me? And I feel lucky among the blessed. I know it, but I would say, love God, love Jesus, love his word. I do see, I've never felt, and maybe it's just the feeling, but I've never felt like the world has crept into our church more than it has over these last couple of years, and all of these different thoughts and theories and thinking. And man, the Bible to me is it's just life. It's just the big bright light. And I think you got to love the Bible, try to orient your life on it, and seek his kingdom first. I mean, that's why I imperfectly, wholeheartedly get up off the ground and do it again. I mean, this is a life by faith, not a life by perfection to a law, but a wholehearted devotion to God, his word, and to his kingdom. To me, that's what I would say. That's it. That's all I got. I mean,
right.
It's God to me. And I feel very grateful that I can do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think we can't live as Christians for the blessings. I love that song. We can't love the healing more than the healer, and just the idea that life is full and good as a Christian, but it's all about heaven and getting to be with God. And, I think even as I just shared, to watch my dad live the life that he did and be able to die in a place where he was able to say, I don't have regrets, and I have done what I've wanted God to use me for to the best of my ability. And to feel like we can bring as many people with us to heaven, that heaven is real, it's what we're living for, that life is a mist. And I want to enjoy this mist and appreciate the blessings, but know that this world is not our home, and that God is enough, and that other people desperately need what we have.
Yeah, Wyndham, over a period of 5 years, lost his speech, lost his ability to hunt and fish and run and walk. He couldn't balance. He couldn't eat. I mean, it was all that. And he was joyful, genuinely joyful to the very end. What did he have to look forward to? I mean, and yet he did. He had eternity to look forward to, and he went out exactly the way I want to go out. And so I think that's what it's all about.
Kevin and Melissa, thank you so much for your time, and all the best to you in Boston. Going to be praying for your work there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining the Rob Skinner podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast, please hit the subscribe button and let your friends know about it and how to find it. Because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.